A few weeks ago, I felt myself standing at the edge of this massive construction site. It was out in the middle of a pretty remote stretch of land.
Okay.
And I was talking to a lead infrastructure engineer. He was overseeing the arrival of these several heavy-duty crates, all marked with the NVIDIA Blackwell logo.
The new hardware.
The new hardware. And the whole atmosphere was just, it felt electric, really focused, but also a little unsettling. He looked at those crates with a kind of reverence, almost like they were religious relics.
Wow.
But, tempered with this exhaustion from just immense physical work.
Yeah.
And he told me that what we were looking at wasn't just a hardware delivery. He called it the end of the era of fiction.
The end of the era of fiction. That's a phrase.
It is. And he explained that to him, the last decade of tech, all the social media, the VR hype, all the layers of abstraction we built was just a distraction. He kept repeating this line that just stuck with me. We are finally moving from bits back to atoms.
Right. The physical world.
Exactly. The excitement in his voice was all about the sheer physical scale of it, the velocity of the project. He was boasting about how they had surgically removed all the parasitic bureaucratic cycles to stand up this massive AI megacluster in record time.
The speed was everything.
Everything. And he spoke about the power demand, this overwhelming physical demand, as the energy necessity. Or his term was the thermodynamic imperative. He said it like it was a physical law he was personally in charge of enforcing.
Like he was fighting against entropy itself.
That's it. But then I just happened to casually mention the local environmental impact reports, the standard 3-year window you usually need for a big grid integration project.
Uh-oh.
And the change in his demeanor was instantaneous. It was jarring, really informative. All that high-tech euphoria just vanished, replaced by this look of cold, genuine hostility.
He didn't just disagree then.
No. He looked at the mention of regulatory reviews as if I had suggested a deliberate act of sabotage, like I was on the other team. He pointed to a nearby decommissioned nuclear facility and said, every single day that plant stays cold because of a piece of paper, we are committing civilizational homicide.
That is incredibly strong language.
He called the regulators priests of entropy and argued that their guiding philosophy, the precautionary principle, was just a slow-motion suicide pact for the West. And that sudden shift from silicon engineering to this raw, almost militant demand for nuclear energy, it made me realize something profound.
What's that?
This whole AI race, it has moved. It's out of the abstract data centers now, and it's squarely in the physical world of power plants and transmission lines. The digital and the physical are finally colliding. And the result is this total pivot toward a future that I think most people are not ready to witness. A world where intelligence stops being a software product and it becomes a direct function of how much raw, continuous energy we can harvest from the earth.
Which forces a very big question on us.
It does. Are we entering a new age of superabundance, or are we building a thermodynamic god that will demand everything we have just to stay awake?
That framing, the energy necessity, the hostility to anything that slows down the velocity, it just perfectly captures the urgency of this moment. And for you listening, this deep dive is vital because that collision between exponentially growing AI and finite physical reality, whether it's energy grids or old regulations, that is arguably the defining conflict of our time.
So where do we start?
Our mission today is to unpack exactly how these technical demands of AI are driving this massive physical pressure. Defining that shift from digital fiction to atom-level engineering.
Okay.
Then we'll get into the geopolitical strategies that are emerging from this stress, all centered on this need for what are called sovereign stacks.
And finally,
we'll dive into that ideological battleground, the regulation that your engineer was so angry about, which the builders see as the main thing determining the pace of civilizational change itself.
Okay, let's unpack that core shift first, the end of the era of fiction. For years, the tech story was all software iterations, microservices, gains measured in nanoseconds.
Right, efficiency in the code.
Exactly. Now, all of a sudden, the race to build and train these huge frontier AI models, it's not just about clever algorithms anymore. It's about raw physical computational throughput. It is literally that shift from bit fiction to atom reconstruction.
And we are talking about an industrial scale and engineering velocity that we really haven't seen in decades. Maybe since the Manhattan Project, like you said, or building the interstate highway system.
That analogy feels right, because the hardware that's driving this, specifically the NVIDIA Blackwell architecture, it seems like a complete redefinition of what a computer cluster even is.
It is. And for you to really grasp the intensity of the energy demand we're going to talk about, you have to first understand the scale of this physical infrastructure. It's the foundation for everything else.
So give us the technical roadmap. What makes this new generation of chips and clusters so fundamentally different from the GPU farms we had even, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And why is this idea of scaling up so important before you even try to scale out?
So the modern philosophy for building these AI factories, and they really are factories, intelligence is the product, is twofold. Scale up, then scale out.
Okay, what's the difference?
Scaling out is what we've been doing for decades in cloud computing. You harness thousands of separate computers, and they share the workload. But scaling up is about pushing the absolute limits of what a single unified computer can do.
So making one giant powerful brain first.
Exactly. You maximize performance and, critically, energy efficiency in that one unit before you start linking thousands of them together. Blackwell is all about redefining the limits of that initial scale-up. The core unit of this new scale is the Grace Blackwell superchip.
And this is where the engineering gets really intense, right?
This is it. This unit fuses 2 massive Blackwell GPUs with 1 NVIDIA Grace CPU. And I have to emphasize, this isn't just, soldering chips onto a board. They are united into a single module using this incredibly high-speed interconnect called NVLink chip-to-chip.
Okay, let's pause on that, because that integration seems like a huge technical leap. Historically, the big bottleneck was the CPU and GPU passing data back and forth, right? The analogy I always hear is like 2 brilliant specialists trying to talk through a tiny, slow straw.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it gets at the central problem in computing, what's called the von Neumann bottleneck. Imagine you've got your GPU, the calculation engine, and then you have the main system memory, the DRAM.
Right.
To do anything, the GPU has to constantly ask for data, pull it across that relatively slow bust your straw, wait for it, process it, and then often wait again to send the result back. This constant data shuffle is slow, and crucially, it burns an immense amount of power.
So a lot of the energy is just spent on moving data around, not on the actual thinking.
The energy cost of moving the data often vastly exceeds the energy cost of the computation itself. It's incredibly wasteful. The Grace Blackwell superchip it bypasses that whole problem. It allows the CPU and both GPUs to share one single massive pool of memory directly. That NVLink interconnect boosts performance by an order of magnitude because it just eliminates that painful latency. It eliminates the energy cost of the data shuffle.
So it's seamless, instant communication.
And that is non-negotiable for these new frontier AI models. We're talking models that are approaching or even blowing past 1 trillion parameters. They're trained on tens of trillions of tokens of data. When your model is that complex, every single nanosecond and every single watt matters. Any bottleneck is a catastrophic waste of time and power.
That makes the shift so clear. It's a war against the friction of data movement. But this superchip, powerful as it is still just one component. How does that translate into the massive construction project you saw? We're talking atoms, 2-ton crates, industrial logistics.
Right. So we move from the individual chip to the new physical standard of the AI data center, the GB200 NVL72 rack scale system.
This is the 2-ton beast.
This is the 2-ton, 1.5-ton beast. A single rack is engineered to function as one massive virtual GPU. It treats all 72 chips as a single unified processing unit. And building it defines what we mean by engineering velocity.
2 tons. That number is genuinely staggering. Can you give us a sense of the sheer physical complexity inside just one of those racks?
It's an extreme convergence of systems engineering. Each NVL72 rack has more than 600,000 individual parts, all of them orchestrated by millions of lines of proprietary code.
600,000 parts.
And to connect them, each rack contains over 2 miles of copper wire. Specifically, this is the NVLink switch spine. It has to be precisely cut, measured, and assembled just to minimize signal loss.
And that spine is what lets all 72 GPUs talk to each other as one.
Yes. It orchestrates communication among all 72 GPUs across 18 different compute trays, and it's engineered to move data at a mind-boggling 130 terabytes per second.
130 terabytes per second? That number almost doesn't feel real. It requires a mental reset. It feels less like traditional IT and more like something from, fundamental physics.
Well, the source material puts it in perspective. It's fast enough to transfer the entire peak traffic of the global internet in less than a second.
Wow.
This blisteringly fast, unrestricted communication is what allows these colossal AI models to train efficiently. The entire system is designed to eliminate the concept of data queuing. The data just needs to be there instantly.
And this velocity, this ability to engineer and deploy these physical systems faster than anyone else, that's becoming the ultimate competitive metric, isn't it?
Absolutely. Which brings us to this idea of the Colossus indictment. Take the example of xAI's Colossus supercomputer project. This facility, which is designed to house over 200,000 NVIDIA GPUs, was fully created, built, and stood up in only 122 days.
122 days, 4 months. To build an infrastructure project that historically would have taken a year, maybe more, just in planning and permitting, let alone construction.
Precisely. And that staggering deployment rate isn't just framed as a technical success. It's framed as an indictment of legacy engineering and bureaucratic bloat.
An indictment?
The sources argue that this demonstrates the true, latent, hardcore engineering velocity that's possible when what they call parasitic friction, the endless reviews, the consensus-seeking committees, the drawn-out permit approvals, is just surgically removed from the process.
So the new strategic advantage isn't just having the best tech, it's being able to deploy it faster than your competitor.
That's the whole game now.
Which brings us right back to my opening story. The velocity of these Colossus-class projects, the fact that companies can deploy 2-ton racks moving data at 130 terabytes per second in 122 days, that intense speed is exactly what creates the energy necessity. We're building intelligence so massive and so fast that it fundamentally changes our entire planetary energy equation.
And if the AI race is determined by compute, and compute is just a transaction in energy, then this whole thing. It's not an arms race. It's a race for a stable, continuous baseload power.
The kind of power that's always on.
Always on. We are building digital furnaces that require a level of stability and scale that, traditional intermittent renewables just cannot provide on their own. This is the power wall. It's the immediate, overwhelming energy crisis driven by this new scale.
Let's put some numbers on that crisis. We're not talking about a modest little bump in energy use here, are we?
Not at all. We're talking about demands that put real pressure on national grids. The macroeconomic data already projects that global power demand from data centers will increase by 165% by the end of this decade.
165%.
And to be even more specific, the International Energy Agency estimates that data center electricity consumption could double by 2026. Just 2 years from now, reaching about 1,000 terawatt hours, TWH.
1,000 TWH. That number that's not marginal. That's comparable to the total electricity consumption of an entire major industrialized country, like Japan.
Or Australia, yeah.
Right.
It's a staggering amount of power to find and secure in just 2 years.
And the industry feels this urgency, right?
They're on the front lines of it. Surveys consistently show that 92% of data center executives already see grid constraints, the simple inability of local power infrastructure to supply enough stable electricity, as the #1 obstacle to scaling their operations.
They need baseload power, and they need it yesterday, especially if they're building these huge clusters in just 4 months.
Exactly. The construction timeline and the power timeline are completely out of sync.
Okay, so the problem is enormous scale, plus this absolute need for stability. Now, the big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're very public about their carbon neutral and net zero goals. So what's the solution they're choosing to meet this gigawatt scale demand without throwing those goals out the window?
The definitive answer that's emerging is a full-scale nuclear revival, specifically a focus on small modular reactors, or SMRs.
SMRs.
This technology is seen as the only credible, scalable path to get the kind of superabundance of clean energy they need.
That is a huge shift. I mean, nuclear energy has faced decades of intense cultural, political, and regulatory headwinds. Why SMRs? Why is nuclear the necessary answer instead of just building, exponentially more solar and wind farms?
It really comes down to physics and system design. For an AI cluster that's running a massive training job for 6 months straight, stability and predictability are everything.
You can't have brownouts.
You can't. The true operational metrics here are energy density and capture efficiency. A wind farm or a solar installation gives you intermittent power. It depends on the weather. When the sun sets or the wind dies down, that cluster either has to slow down, which is a disaster for a complex training run, or it has to switch to unreliable, high-carbon diesel backups.
Which defeats the whole purpose of being green.
Completely. Nuclear, on the other hand, offers stable, continuous, carbon-free baseload power. And SMRs, because they're modular and smaller, they're designed to be sited closer to the data center itself, which minimizes transmission losses and simplifies grid integration.
So you get that stable 20 and 47 power that a 100 exaflop AI cluster demands. It's a constant, relentless energy profile.
The models demand energy uninterrupted.
And the sources frame this big push for SMRs as something more than just an engineering solution, don't they? They see it as a philosophical statement.
They do. It's framed as humanity's reclamation of the Promethean fire. It symbolizes a return to hard engineering pragmatism and a deliberate effort to overcome what they describe as irrational fear around complex technology.
So it's the antidote to something called the Great Stagnation.
Exactly. The Great Stagnation is the theory that technological growth slowed way down after the 1970s because we basically stopped pursuing these big, complex, high-energy density solutions. To break out of that stagnation and fuel the AI boom, the consensus among the builders is clear. They need gigawatt-scale, always-on energy, and they don't care about the historical resistance.
And this isn't just talk. We're seeing real-world partnerships, major investments from big tech that show this is their critical path. Let's break down their strategies.
You can really see two different approaches. There's investing in future technology, and then there's leveraging what already exists.
Okay, who's betting on the future?
On the future state side, you have Google. They're partnering with a company called Kairos Power to build 7 modular reactors. The goal is to generate 500 megawatts by 2035, specifically for their data centers.
So that's an explicit bet on developing a brand new generation of reactors.
It is. It shows they're willing to fight the R&D and permitting battles to get there.
But what about companies that need that power right now? What's the strategy for leveraging existing plants?
That's the approach you see from Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Microsoft. It speaks to a much more immediate demand for stable power. AWS, for instance, made a really strategic move. They just acquired an existing nuclear-powered data center complex in Pennsylvania.
So they aren't waiting for new SMRs to be designed and approved.
No, they are buying into established operational stable power sources right now.
And Microsoft.
Similarly, Microsoft has been deeply involved in projects that include a strategic plan to use power from the revived 3 Mile Island nuclear plant.
The 3 Mile Island, wow.
Their leadership has been very vocal about this. They've said that nuclear energy is absolutely critical to supporting their AI ambitions and their net zero commitments at the same time. They're prioritizing consistent, reliable supply above everything else.
It's clear this is a unified strategy across the whole industry. They're choosing nuclear because it provides the thermodynamic necessity to fuel the next stage of intelligence. But as my opening story showed, this massive, rapid pivot runs straight into the wall of bureaucratic friction that's been built up over decades.
And that creates a tremendous flashpoint. We're moving now from the technical solution to SMRs to the political and regulatory obstructions that, in the view of the people building this future, are actively and irresponsibly standing in the way. Which brings us directly to the hostility you saw.
We really need to report on the language from the source material here, but let's just add a layer of critical distance. The engineer's description of regulators as priests of entropy, enforcing a slow-motion suicide pact. I mean, that is incredibly charged, extreme rhetoric.
It is.
But what is the core ideological conflict that drives that level of hostility?
That extreme language is really designed to highlight this deep foundational conflict between two opposing policy philosophies, the innovation principle and the precautionary principle. The hostility comes from the conviction that one of these principles is fundamentally holding back human progress.
Let's define those two views very clearly, because this is really where the ideological war over AI and energy kicks off.
Okay, so the precautionary principle is the idea that if a new technology carries a plausible, even speculative risk of harming the public or the environment, then the burden of proof is on the innovators to prove it won't cause harm.
Better safe than sorry.
Essentially. And if they can't prove it safe, the government should limit or ban it. Proponents, activists, NGOs, some academics, they argue for limiting tech based on potential hypothetical harms, whether that's job loss or the more philosophical risk of summoning the demon with advanced AI.
And what's the critique of that principle from the other side, from the accelerationist camp?
The critique is just as strong. They argue that this approach causes what they call statistical civilizational homicide.
That's another very strong term.
It is. And the argument is that by blocking the very technological solutions like advanced medicine, clean energy, or AI for resource allocation, that could solve concrete, measurable problems like climate change or disease, you are, statistically, causing more death and suffering than you prevent.
Okay, so what's the opposing philosophy that the builders subscribe to? The innovation principle.
Right. The innovation principle holds that the overwhelming majority of innovations benefit society immensely, and that the risks are usually modest, manageable, and reversible.
So the government's job should be to get out of the way.
To pave the way for innovation, and to apply light touch, targeted rules only when the risks are reasonable, well understood, and truly irreversible. The core issue for them is timing. Do you intervene preemptively based on fear, or do you wait for actual measurable evidence of harm before you act?
The engineer I met was clearly reacting to what he saw as unnecessary friction from the precautionary principle. What are some specific examples of this bureaucratic entropy in the AI world that create this friction?
One of the biggest areas is algorithmic explainability. Policies, like parts of the EU's GDPR, often require that an AI's decisions be explainable to a human. The intent is good accountability, but the unintended consequence is this fundamental trade-off with accuracy and performance.
It's a trade-off. So the AI actually gets dumber if you force it to explain itself in human terms.
In many cases, yes. The most sophisticated AIs, the ones using deep learning with billions of parameters, they often function as black boxes. They get superior results precisely because they find non-obvious correlations in the data that are just too complex for a human brain to track or simplify.
Is there a real-world example of this?
The Deep Patient System from Mount Sinai Hospital is the perfect case study. It was trained on 700,000 patient records, and it could predict diseases, schizophrenia, some cancers, diabetes years in advance with accuracy far superior to human doctors.
But it couldn't tell you why.
Exactly. When you ask it why it made a prediction, it can't give you a simple, digestible answer. It's just too complex. So mandating explainability might force a hospital to use a simpler, less accurate model just to comply with the law. The pursuit of perfect transparency results in a less useful, potentially less life-saving outcome.
That's a powerful example of a well-intentioned rule just crashing into reality. What about rules requiring human oversight?
Manual human review is another classic example of this entropy. Think of GDPR Article 22, which gives citizens the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing. The idea is to prevent AI from making mistakes without appeal.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface.
It does. But requiring a human to review every significant algorithmic decision fundamentally undermines the entire purpose of automation, which is to do things faster and cheaper than humans. Research shows that when reviewing complex legal contracts, for instance, AI systems are significantly faster and more accurate than human lawyers.
So forcing human review not only adds cost, but could actually introduce more errors.
It adds massive cost, and it forces companies to choose simpler, less powerful AIs, or just abandon the technology altogether. The result is a net loss in productivity for the whole economy.
And this isn't just about software. We see this in the physical world, too, with policies trying to protect jobs by just banning useful tech.
Absolutely. The most extreme form of the precautionary principle leads to restrictive bans. You saw this in the early 20th century, calls to ban cars to protect jobs for carriage drivers. We see the exact same logic today with autonomous vehicles.
No.
India's road transport minister, for example, talked about banning self-driving trucks because of potential job losses. In the U.S., you had lawmakers in Chicago introduce an ordinance to ban autonomous vehicles, calling them a job killer.
And in San Francisco, with the delivery robots.
San Francisco temporarily banned delivery robots on most sidewalks. One official called them clever toys designed to eliminate jobs. The source material points out that, from an economic view, eliminating jobs is precisely what technology is supposed to do. It's just a less flattering term for boosting productivity and increasing consumer welfare.
So whether it's slowing down a nuclear reactor with a 3-year review, forcing explainability on a life-saving medical AI, or banning delivery robots, the net effect is always the same: a delay in realizing societal benefits, the cost of delay.
It's the invisible graveyard of cost disease. The argument from the accelerationist camp is that these delays, imposed by agencies like the NRC or EPA, directly postpone breakthroughs that could solve huge material problems. They stress that if we slow down the intelligence needed to develop new materials or solve fusion, all out of a speculative fear of job loss, we are causing more long-term material harm than good.
It's powerful ideological stance. Okay, let's pivot from these domestic roadblocks to how this competition for compute is playing out on the global geopolitical stage. So we've established the AI race is a hardware and energy race. It's anchored in physical stuff, and whenever something becomes that strategically critical, that deep in the physical stack, nations stop treating it like a commodity and start treating it like territory. Strategic, economic, military territory.
Absolutely. And this is where the concept of the sovereign compute stack moves right to the forefront of global policy.
So what's the driver here? Is it just fear?
The primary driver is a simple, hard-nosed fear of an irreversible economic and strategic divide. A world of AI have nations and AI have not nations. Countries are waking up to the fact that relying entirely on external powers, particularly the US hyperscalers, for their cognitive infrastructure creates an unacceptable strategic vulnerability.
So what does sovereign AI actually mean in practice? What are nations doing to get this autonomy?
Sovereign AI means a nation or a major economic bloc controls the entire stack. From the data to the computing infrastructure, the GPUs, the racks, and the core tech needed to develop, train, and deploy their own large language models.
And training them on their own cultural data, right?
That's a huge part of it. Training models on data native to their local dialects, legal systems, literature to make sure the AI is attuned to local practices and national security needs. This trend really picked up speed in 2023. It's basically technological nationalism applied to intelligence.
And we're seeing major investments around the world.
Huge investments unfolding rapidly. Canada, for instance, recently unveiled a $1 billion investment in a sovereign AI compute strategy to build public supercomputing infrastructure. The UK has its AI Opportunities Action Plan, focused on creating AI growth zones to fast-track data center construction.
And the big economic blocs are treating this like a new industrial revolution.
They are. The European Union has launched its massive AI Continent Action Plan, investing an estimated $200 billion to create a sovereign European AI ecosystem. That includes setting up at least 13 regional AI factories and up to 5 national AI gigafactories.
In China.
Meanwhile, China continues its comprehensive state-led strategy aimed directly at achieving technological self-sufficiency across the entire semiconductor and compute supply chain. They want total state control over their domestic AI sector.
The message is clear. Compute is the new territory. Control the physical stack or you're a vassal state. Right. What's the risk of not building your own stack and just using APIs from US companies?
The risk is what's being called the voluntary ceding of cognitive sovereignty. If you rely on centralized API endpoints from OpenAI or Google for your foundational AI, the knowledge base, the security, the access, it can all be controlled or just revoked by a foreign entity. The future belongs to those who control the physical stack. It's a strategic defense against the emerging compute franchise.
Okay, now let's turn to the shadow side of this. We have to talk about the claims that these regulatory campaigns aren't always about protecting the public. Sometimes they're about securing market dominance for incumbents. The idea of regulatory capture, using safety as a shield.
This is a vital and very controversial area that researchers are digging into. The argument is that undue industry influence can lead to policies that favor the big incumbent players and undermine the public interest. The concern isn't just simple lobbying. It's the more subtle ways industry tries to shape the very content and existence of regulations to protect their market advantages.
So how does this influence actually work in the AI policy world?
Researchers have identified several key pathways. For instance, 15 out of 17 experts they interviewed cited agenda setting as a primary tool. This is where the industry advances narratives that either demand specific types of regulation that only they can comply with, or steer policy away from problems that would hurt their business models.
And this often ties into the critique of AI safetyism, the idea that focusing on long-term, catastrophic existential risk, or X risk, is a moral language hiding a financial strategy.
That's the core of the critique. The argument is that this opposition, sometimes called the D-cells, couches its arguments in this moral language of safety, but that it ultimately functions as regulatory capture designed to protect incumbents. And this strategy has historical parallels.
Like the famous Halloween documents from the late 90s, where Microsoft internally strategized how to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FED, against open source software like Linux.
Exactly like that. The modern parallel is using the narrative of national security vulnerability as a competitive shield against open source AI models. We see this very clearly in recent policy campaigns. For example, OpenAI submitted a policy proposal recommending that the US government consider banning models from foreign entities, specifically calling out Chinese labs like DeepSeek.
Framing them as state-subsidized and a security risk.
Right. But the source material notes that these open-source DeepSeek models, which anyone can access, don't have any known mechanisms for collecting user data or reporting back to the Chinese government. And major U.S. companies like Microsoft and Amazon actually host these models themselves without any security concern.
So the motive becomes questionable. If the models aren't inherently insecure, why lobby for a ban?
And in a related example, Anthropic's CEO Dario Amodei made public statements claiming that algorithmic secrets are worth $100 million and are just a few lines of code, explicitly calling for government intervention to protect leading AI companies from industrial espionage.
So the narrative from the big incumbents is all about existential risk and national security, which just so happens to require government intervention through high regulatory barriers that protects their IP and their competitive edge.
Which brings us to the real concern that the critics say is underlying all this lobbying. It's not primarily about security, it's about commoditization.
Meaning AI is becoming cheap and easy to access.
Exactly. Open source models are getting better and cheaper very, very quickly. They're approaching parity with the proprietary models. And as AI becomes a commodity, the economic moats that protect these proprietary companies and support their massive valuations start to crumble. Regulation in this context is a tool to create artificial scarcity. It helps maintain the premium pricing and the high valuations of companies that are, in many cases, still operating at a loss.
And the consequences of this kind of regulatory capture would extend beyond just protecting valuations.
It leads to several major societal downsides. First, innovation concentration, where only a few giant, well-capitalized companies can afford to comply with the complex regulations. Second, barrier asymmetry, where startups and open-source projects get crushed by compliance costs. And third, resource misallocation, where public money goes to enforcing regulations designed to protect private interests instead of funding independent research.
So the argument is that this pressure to regulate is highest when the quality gap between proprietary and open models is shrinking the fastest.
That's a theory. The pressure to use policy as a weapon against margin erosion increases.
So for policymakers who might be listening, what are the recommended solutions to manage this influence and make sure regulation serves the public, not just the incumbents?
The recommendations really focus on building independence and transparency. It means investing substantial independent funding into civil society institutions and academic research that doesn't rely on industry grants. It means strengthening ethics policies around the revolving door between government and industry.
And building up expertise inside the government itself.
Critically, yes. Building technical capacity inside government agencies so they can understand and assess the tech independently instead of just taking the company's word for it. And finally, just a radical increase in transparency around the industry's influence activities, lobbying, meetings, funding, and demanding that policymakers verify industry-originated information through independent sources.
This entire discussion, from the 2-ton rack to the gigawatt power demand to the battle over regulation, it's all centered on brute force engineering and political control. But what if the entire premise of the AI energy crisis is flawed? What if the answer isn't building massive nuclear plants for high-powered GPUs, but changing the fundamental physics of computation itself?
That is the most radical and honestly the most potentially revolutionary frontier we're looking at. The potential for thermodynamic computing to be a definitive relief valve that could decouple AI growth from its massive energy and carbon footprint. This whole approach asks a different question. What if the problem isn't the power source, but the way we've engineered the electrons?
Okay, let's start by breaking down the physical flaw in current computing that this new paradigm is trying to fix. It goes beyond just the von Neumann bottleneck we talked about.
The flaw is the intrinsic inefficiency of determinism. Standard digital computing operates under this rigid regime of noise suppression. To make sure a transistor is unequivocally a digital 0 or a digital 1, the system has to operate at high voltages. It's constantly spending significant energy just to fight against the natural, random jiggling of electrons caused by heat.
The thermal noise.
The thermal noise. So we are spending a massive amount of power just to maintain this artificial perfection, to keep everything neat and predictable.
We're paying energy to suppress randomness.
Precisely. The system is designed to pay energy to suppress stochasticity. Every single logical operation, every time a transistor switches, it generates waste heat that does absolutely nothing for the calculation. It's energy lost to the friction of imposing order on nature, and the energy cost becomes exorbitant because we are actively fighting thermodynamics with every single clock cycle.
So this new approach is a total paradigm shift. An inversion of the tyranny of the watt.
It is. Thermodynamic computing doesn't fight the noise, it harnesses it. It uses it as a computational resource. The foundational idea is that calculation can be seen as a natural physical process of a system just relaxing toward a state of thermal equilibrium.
So instead of fighting entropy, you're flowing with it. How does that actually work in the silicon? We're moving beyond the digital bit. What's the new core unit?
We move from the deterministic switch, the digital bit, to the probabilistic bit, or p-bit.
P-bit.
Right. Unlike a digital bit that stays statically at 0 or 1, a p-bit is a stochastic oscillator. It's constantly fluctuating between 0 and 1 on nanosecond timescales, and that fluctuation is driven by the ambient thermal noise in the environment.
Okay, but why is that constant chaotic fluctuation useful? It sounds inherently unreliable if you're trying to compute something.
It's a controlled, deliberate chaos. By applying small control voltages to the circuit, you can bias the fluctuation. So, for example, you can set the p-bit to spend 80% of its time in state 1 and 20% in state 0.
So it physically represents a probability.
It natively physically mimics probability distributions. And when you connect many of these p-bits together, the entire coupled circuit represents a complex joint probability distribution.
And that connection to probability is key for modern AI, especially generative AI.
It's absolutely critical. AI is all about probabilities, predicting the most likely next word, generating the most probable pixel in an image. When you read the state of this chip, you get a statistically valid sample of that complex distribution instantly.
So this is where we get those massive efficiency claims, the 10,000x advantage people talk about. Where does that incredible energy gain come from?
It comes from the difference between native sampling and digital simulation. On a deterministic GPU, if a generative AI needs a random statistical sample, say, for a diffusion model creating an image, the digital system has to run complex pseudo-random number generator algorithms.
It's faking randomness with math.
It's faking randomness with math. And that process consumes thousands of sequential operations and millions of transistor switches, all burning energy just to simulate chance.
But the thermodynamic chip doesn't simulate chance.
It embodies it. The physics generates the sample natively. The complex calculation is done passively. The computation just evolves toward a solution supplied largely by free ambient heat. This eliminates the massive active energy consumption for this specific type of task.
And it also gets around the von Neumann bottleneck, right? No more data shuffle.
Exactly. Because the model weights and connections are physically encoded into the p-bit connections, you eliminate that massive energy cost of data movement, which, as we said, currently consumes more energy than the actual math in a GPU.
How is this different from something like neuromorphic computing that also tries to be more efficient by mimicking the brain?
Neuromorphic computing, like Intel's Loihi chip, tries to mimic the structure of the brain, the spiking neurons and synapses, but it often still uses digital components that require active, precise clock cycles. Thermodynamic computing, on the other hand, tries to mimic the physics of the brain. The brain operates incredibly efficiently at 37 degrees Celsius. It uses thermal noise as a computational resource rather than fighting it. The p-bit approach is the most serious attempt yet to leverage those fundamental physical processes.
So who are the commercial pioneers pushing this radical new physics of calculation?
The most visible spearhead right now is a company called Extropic, which was co-founded by Guillaume Verdon, a prominent figure in the effective accelerationism movement. Their first prototype, the XD chip, proves that these probabilistic circuits can be made using standard silicon processes, and, critically, they operate at room temperature, harnessing ambient heat as a source of entropy.
And they're focused on raw generative speed.
Exactly. Their architecture, like the projected Z1 chip, is aimed at accelerating purely probabilistic workloads. Their main algorithm, the denoising thermodynamic model, uses the chip's physics to literally evolve a noisy state toward an ordered state like a final image by just following the laws of thermodynamics. It consumes vastly less energy than a digital model that has to mathematically calculate how to remove noise.
And there's another company with a different focus, right?
Yes. There's also normal computing. They're approaching the problem from a slightly different angle, prioritizing reliability and interpretability over raw speed.
Okay.
While Extropic is optimizing for maximum entropy and creativity, normal computing is focused on uncertainty quantification. They're using probabilistic hardware to build explainable AI specifically for enterprise risk management. Their CN101 chip is aimed at things like financial services, where knowing the confidence level of an AI's decision is absolutely paramount.
That's a fascinating distinction. Raw acceleration versus reliable, explainable enterprise use. If this technology actually pans out, what are the broader implications for the energy crisis we've been talking about this whole time?
The implication is just huge. If they succeed in scaling up their P-bits, we could be looking at a future where milliwatt-level AI runs everywhere. The technology promises a future of ubiquitous, decentralized, ambient intelligence.
So what currently takes a 2-ton gigawatt-hungry Blackwell rack could one day run on a smartphone.
Or a small sensor cluster. The global power infrastructure alarm bells, that 1,000 TW8 demand, might have a technological relief valve. It could allow exponential intelligence growth to continue without wrecking our climate goals, simply by changing the physics of how we compute.
The era of fighting thermodynamics could be ending. The era of computing with it could be beginning. So let's connect all the dots here. Our deep dive has really explored this core immediate tension. The AI race is forcing an unavoidable, deep reckoning with physical limits. We've seen the limitless potential of intelligence crash headfirst into the finite boundaries of our energy infrastructure and our, frankly, outdated policy frameworks.
And we are left with a clear, binary strategic choice to meet this energy necessity. Either we meet the demand through brute force engineering, gigawatt-scale SMRs, powering 2-ton Blackwell racks, enabling that Colossus effect through sheer scale and velocity. Or we achieve efficiency through a fundamental inversion of physics, harnessing noise with thermodynamic computing to get to milliwatt-level ubiquitous intelligence.
But both paths have the same enemy.
Both pathways share a common enemy, the philosophical and bureaucratic friction that's currently imposed by these regulatory bottlenecks and safety narratives that, as the critique suggests, often function as regulatory capture. The builders are demanding an end to what they call statistical civilizational homicide. They are actively looking for ways to bypass veto point politics to accelerate the expansion of human capacity, whether that capacity is in a nuclear plant or in a P-bit processor.
The sheer velocity of this new engineering age, driven by that shift from abstract bits back to measurable atoms, it suggests that the future political and economic power structures of the world, they're ultimately going to be decided not by traditional policy debates or ideological consensus, but by the physical capacity to convert captured watts and deployed flops into structured intelligence. The race is no longer digital, the race is physical.